Welcome to our lesson on supply and demand and how markets work. Have you ever wondered why prices change? Or why your favorite snack sometimes disappears from the shelf? Well, it all comes down to the fascinating dance of supply and demand. In this lesson, we'll break down these key concepts using everyday examples that you can relate to. Get ready to uncover the secrets behind what makes markets tick and how these forces shape our daily lives. Let's start with the market forces of supply and demand. Supply and demand are the two words that economists use most often. Supply and demand are the forces that make market economies work. Modern microeconomics is about supply, demand, and market equilibrium. Before we dig deeper, let's understand first the meaning of market and competition. A market is a group of buyers and sellers of a particular good or service. The terms supply and demand refer to the behavior of people as they interact with one another in markets. Buyers determine demand. Sellers determine supply. Now, what is competitive markets? A competitive market is a market in which there are many buyers and sellers so that each has a negligible impact on the market price. In supply and demand, there is also the element of competition that is perfect and otherwise. There are four kinds of competition that you have to remember in here. First, perfect competition is when products are the same. There are numerous buyers and sellers so that each has no influence over price because buyers and sellers are price takers. Second, monopoly. In monopoly, there is only one seller that controls the price. Third, oligopoly. There are only a few sellers and the competition is not always aggressive. Fourth, monopolistic competition. In this kind of competition, there are many sellers and the products are slightly differentiated. Each seller may set price for its own product. Now let's talk about demand. Quantity demanded is the amount of a good that buyers are willing and able to purchase. The law of demand states that, other things equal, the quantity demanded of a good falls when the price of the good rises. The demand curve, the relationship between price and quantity demanded. The demand schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of the good and the quantity demanded. Let's look at Catherine's demand schedule. Catherine loves to eat ice cream in a cone. So every time Catherine buys ice cream, she does not only have the ice cream, but also the cone. So there are two things to be considered here, the price of ice cream and the quantity of cones demanded. The demand curve is a graph of the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. Let's look at Catherine's demand schedule and demand curve. Looking at the graph, one can see that as the price of an ice cream cone increases, the demand for ice cream cones decreases. On the other hand, as the price of ice cream cones decreases, the demand for ice cream cones increases. Let's continue with the market demand versus individual demand. Market demand refers to the sum of all individual demands for a particular good or service. Graphically, individual demand curves are summed horizontally to obtain the market demand curve. Sometimes there are also shifts in the demand curve. This happens when there is a change in quantity demanded. It means there is movement along the demand curve caused by a change in the price of the product. Here are some elements that cause shifts in the demand curve. First, consumer income. Second, prices of related goods. Third, tastes. Fourth, expectations. Fifth, number of buyers. Let's talk about consumer income first. As income increases, the demand for a normal good will increase. As income increases, the demand for an inferior good will decrease. Next, prices of related goods. When a fall in the price of one good reduces the demand for another good, the two goods are called substitutes. When a fall in the price of one good increases the demand for another good, the two goods are called complements. We also have to consider the supply. Quantity supplied is the amount of a good that sellers are willing and able to sell. We also have to understand the law of supply. The law of supply states that, other things equal, the quantity supplied of a good rises when the price of the good rises. The law of supply can be better understood with the help of the supply curve. The supply curve is the graph of the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied. The supply schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of the good and the quantity supplied. Up to this point, do you have questions? If you have questions, write in the chat box and I'll answer them. Let's continue with market supply versus individual supply. Market supply refers to the sum of all individual supplies for all sellers of a particular good or service. Graphically, individual supply curves are summed horizontally to obtain the market supply curve. Sometimes shifts in the supply curve occur due to the effect of input prices, technology expectations, and number of sellers. When there are shifts in the supply curve, there is also a change in quantity supplied. It means there is movement along the supply curve. This is caused by a change in anything that alters the quantity supplied at each price. There is also a change in supply. A change of supply means there is a shift in the supply curve, either to the left or right. This can be caused by a change in a determinant other than price. When supply and demand are taken together, equilibrium can be reached. Equilibrium refers to a situation in which the price has reached the level where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. In equilibrium, there are equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Equilibrium price is the price that balances quantity supplied and quantity demanded. On a graph, it is the price at which the supply and demand curves intersect. Equilibrium quantity is the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded at the equilibrium price. On a graph, it is the quantity at which the supply and demand curves intersect. Surplus and shortage should also be considered in an equilibrium. In surplus, when price is greater than equilibrium price, then quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. There is excess supply or a surplus. Suppliers will lower the price to increase sales, thereby moving toward equilibrium. In shortage, when price is lesser than equilibrium price, then quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. There is excess demand or a shortage. Suppliers will raise the price due to too many buyers chasing too few goods, thereby moving toward equilibrium. Law of supply and demand claims that the price of any good adjusts to bring the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded for that good into balance. There are 3 steps to analyzing changes in equilibrium. 1. Decide whether the event shifts the supply or demand curve or both. 2. Decide whether the curve or curves shift to the left or to the right. 3. Use the supply and demand diagram to see how the shift affects equilibrium price and quantity. Shifts in curves versus movements along curves. A shift in the supply curve is called a change in supply. A movement along a fixed supply curve is called a change in quantity supplied. A shift in the demand curve is called a change in demand. A movement along a fixed demand curve is called a change in quantity demanded. Summary: economists use the model of supply and demand to analyze competitive markets. In a competitive market, there are many buyers and sellers, each of whom has little or no influence on the market price. The demand curve shows how the quantity of a good depends upon the price. According to the law of demand, as the price of a good falls, the quantity demanded rises. Therefore, the demand curve slopes downward. In addition to price, other determinants of how much consumers want to buy include income, the prices of complements and substitutes, tastes, expectations, and the number of buyers. If one of these factors changes, the demand curve shifts. The supply curve shows how the quantity of a good supplied depends upon the price. According to the law of supply, as the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied rises. Therefore, the supply curve slopes upward. In addition to price, other determinants of how much producers want to sell include input prices, technology, expectations, and the number of sellers. If one of these factors changes, the supply curve shifts. Market equilibrium is determined by the intersection of the supply and demand curves. At the equilibrium price, the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. The behavior of buyers and sellers naturally drives markets toward their equilibrium. To analyze how any event influences a market, we use the supply and demand diagram to examine how the event affects the equilibrium price and quantity. In market economies, prices are the signals that guide economic decisions and thereby allocate resources. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to give that like button a tap and subscribe for more engaging lessons. Remain curious and let's keep exploring together. Reference Mankiw NG, 2nd edition, Principles of Microeconomics.